Welcome to Lodging on Demand. In this episode, lodging editor George Selly speaks with Charlestowne Hotel's Chief Revenue Officer Johnathan Capps on trends and best practices in post-pandemic budgeting, focusing on revenue team forecasting and expenses related to sales, marketing, IT, and other areas.
Yeah, let's get right into it, Johnathan. So, can you describe maybe how the work that you do, right, in the budgeting area has changed post-pandemic, right, compared to pre-pandemic? For example, has accurate, budget forecasting become more challenging now than it used to be?
Yeah. So I'm the chief revenue officer at Charlestowne Hotels, and kind of have a twofold job as an executive. One is focused a lot on the top line performance of our portfolio and the rooms revenue, and secondarily is as an executive who's been in the business a while, to kind of recognize trends or identify things that we could see in general as an executive team member. Since COVID, the interaction from the top line has been, pacing's gone out the door, booking windows have gone out the door. So you've kind of had a shift in predictability in the sense of not only to, major KPIs or things that you watch in terms of forecasting and budgeting, but on a granular level, now you've even done it on a segmentation level. So, for us, I think the difficulty is and the good side is we had some stuff come back pretty quickly, as things were still tight some places, some markets, beach markets, and, some stuff in Florida saw some early reactions. So we were able to kind of learn lessons that we weren't learning all at one time. Mm-hmm. I think where the challenge is coming actually for a company like ours is reassessing business mix, right? And what the true operation of our business is, and what our guests are, right? And I'll give a quick example of that. Is you take a 50 key hotel with a boardroom and a coffee shop, right? No super difficult F&B, but a little bit there, and a little bit of conference services revenue, let's call it the light. Traditionally a hotel like that for us and in most mini markets is going to do 10 to 15% in group and 8 to 12% in corporate, not a ton, but enough to kind of employ a sales manager, spend money directly on group and corporate sales, and kind of focus area in that. Well, COVID hits and, pandemic shuts everything down. And these are levels of business we're still talking about. When are they going to come back, if they're going to come back at all? So now you're in a year for some markets. For us, it happened, a little bit in 2022, but definitely in 2023, where you're now assessing that the last year or two, you've been able to replace half of your group business and half of your corporate business or more with leisure business, right? You haven't sold maybe as many, the meeting room as much as you wanted, and haven't had some catered events, but you've far offset it because you've, sold at a leisure rate, and that leisure guest is still accessing your coffee shop. So you're at a point where you're like, all right, do we put the money back into channels that drive group business? How do we reassess the sales team that we need in place? So I think from a top line perspective, when we're talking about, a post-pandemic environment, some of that kind of looks like it looks in a development environment where you're like, what is our customer base? What is our mix of business? And the sustainability of it in the current budgeting year, and how that impacts the next 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. And that's an exercise that we've gone through over the past year and a half, and that we continue to go through. Right now, there's just not a big sign of that leisure. It's tempered a little bit, but not drastically where you'd say, all right, we're back to group and corporate mix as it was before.
So it's nice at least that the strong return of leisure has compensated somewhat for the corporate, right? The loss of corporate business a little bit, sounds like.
Yeah, It's funny, not to put an asterisk on it, but, I say this at conferences that I attend, and, hopefully some people out there know of us that, we're heavy in the secondary and tertiary seasonal market space, college market space, and, a fair amount of independent. So I'm not out here claiming that, all markets have this approach, or all markets, saw that in 2022. But for us, in the environment that we mainly participate and play and, operate hotels in, that is conducive of what's been happening.
Right. So from what I understand, Johnathan, you focus on expenses related to sales, marketing, IT,
Yep.
those areas, right? Which of those areas would you say has been most impacted by cost increases in today? I mean, it would seem to me that maybe marketing costs have risen during the recovery from COVID. You want to promote that? Want to promote your properties for returning travelers? I would think, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. We have a good balance. This isn't braggadocious at all, and I'm sure you could probably hop on any podcast or trade report these days and talk about labor. So that's area number one for us. When what we felt at a hotel level, we felt at a management company level just as well, right? Where it's like, everyone in the industry, everyone across all industries is assessing, where wages are, where inflation is, and, kind of how the balance is of what's the right price to, attain someone or sustain someone on your team, right? So from a marketing standpoint, our vendor relationships are strong, right? So I don't think, we've felt it as hard that, vendors have come to us and need a drastic change, which has been good because, to your point, what it's allowed us to do is kind of flex some things that have come back. So in the marketing realm, you had maybe a year, maybe a little bit over where, what do you want to say? AdWords dropped down because there was less bidding going on, right? So we had some saving metrics there. There were some markets that bid less, some hotels that needed to spend less. So you've seen some things come back to that sense, but I don't think they've gone too far over for us, right? And we've been able to flex again with some of our great relationships with vendors. And what we've had to address is our team structure, the labor piece of it, and how do we grow as a company and how do we sustain some of these people? The same conversation that our general managers are having about housekeepers, about engineers, about front desk people. Like, what is the talent and what is the kind of value for these positions that we need as a corporate office and as a company?
Sure. So those vendor relationships really sound invaluable for you.
Oh, big time.
Right. Yeah. Great. Now, speaking of staffing, right? The higher, I mean, are there higher labor costs now that might cause you from a budgeting perspective to do some cutting in other areas? I mean, I guess that's how it works in budgeting, right? If your costs jump in one area, you have to figure out how to accommodate that in the budget, right?
Yeah, and I'll say for us, right, like we use a lot of support, right, to kind of position ourselves, and we're definitely not the top line cures all, go in and raise it up and it'll accommodate for the expense, because you're gonna have to explain that later when the market doesn't come. So it's a lot of market studying, it's a lot of us studying ourselves and where we think it can be. But I also say that we're not reactive to the point where I think we get in front of our ownership a lot to where they know what's going on. They know what's happening with wages. They know what's happening with expenses. Cost of goods and delivery is another one, right? That you're dealing with where expenses are going up, but there's things you need and things you have to have. I think and we haven't seen it yet. I think, we've done a good job with our ownership of letting them know what's out there and what's happening. Is I think what you're going to see is maybe a tempering, or you're going to lose some growth, or you're going to lose innovation, right? Like, so there may be a position that someone's had in their mind for the last 3 years that they're like, we need this type of concierge, or we need a brand ambassador, or we need this new tech, right? We need a housekeeping software system, or we need SMS chatbot, right? And those things that have been, kind of on the innovation slides, where it's like, it's not been a year over year expense, but it's something new that could impact us. I think the coulds and the maybes are going to be on the chopping block, unfortunately. Now, for us, it's put them in.
You have to look at those very analytically, right? To determine if you really need them, if they're really necessary, right?
Absolutely. And the struggle in a budgeting vacuum in a year comes with that is like some of those things are 2-3 year pictures, right? You're like, you're not going to see, us take down labor in 2023 because we put in an SMS chatbot and we think it's going to ease up the front desk
Sure.
FTEs, right? Like that'll be an assessment in 2023 or a beta test for a 2024 impact. Now you've done everything to prove out an ROI and kind of get it a case. But if I'm an owner and I'm looking at it, I think they're going to take the other two and say, well, this line or the front desk labor has gone up 25%. I can't put a chat bot SMS on top of it. And not to say they're going to say pick either or, but when you have recurring expenses, you kind of got to start there. And then you go to the cutting room floor with, kind of your wants and dreams or wish list.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's those recurring items. That's your foundation for the annual budget, basically your starting point, right?
Yeah. So we have directives, what we call our budget directives, which are kind of like, there may be some new things in there. It's, call it how insurance premiums are going to come out, and it's systems that we use in the corporate office, our accounting system, and what we're going to do with HR basis, and, some technology requirements in there. Most of them are already in place in a year over year, but it's kind of both of those coupled together. There may be some new things that are just required, right? Call it things that have even happened via COVID, or things that have come out in the last year that, every hotel has. So I think those directives, coupled with a property in a certain market, agreed to participate in a advertisement with the local college for the next 5 years. Well, those are going to be things that aren't hitting our directives, but are going to be things that under via a contract or a repeat expense need to make it in there. But yeah, it's kind of our foundation for where to start after, kind of, or coupled with the top line performance.
And then unexpected costs. How often do you run into that? How do you have to allow for that, I guess, in your budgeting, or do you? And what is your process there?
Yeah, I mean, our budget, we like to say a lot, it, makes a foundation of assumptions, right? Like, what's the climate of the market? What's the hotel? What kind of state is it in? What do we need to be? I think for unexpected for us is coupled with an assumption, right? So in my mind, if we do build in unexpected, we build in inflationary cost of 7%, and someone might say that it's 5%, right? So it's where we're pushing things up, knowing costs are going up, but no one's got a metric for each line item. So we kind of, we address it based on what we're kind of hearing and seeing in the market. And I think the other example of that I can give from the top line, right, is like when outliers become the norm, right? And knock on wood for us, and we're in that season right now, so I don't like to say it over, a recorded podcast, but hurricanes, right? We have hotels in hurricane markets. So there was a 5-year stretch where, we had a hurricane scare, a tropical storm, or an impact on, the same market every year. And it came to the point where, we were explaining budget related to hurricanes, and we're like, all right, after a conversation with ownership, we had built in a hurricane impact because it had become a norm. It had become a norm within 30 days for the previous 5 years, and it had become a trend. So, I think things like that, we call it, you built in something unexpected. It's not stamped on the map that it's going to happen. But it's potential. And, other than that, we don't have a grace period line. We're not like, hey, we're going to take 2% of budgets every year, and we're just going to build that in for non-factors. I think, again, not to recount, how we interact with our owners, but it's not just in a budgetary time of year. So in the event an expense arises, or there's something that comes up in the year that's new and we think we should try, let's go back to that SMS chatbot. We're not waiting till 2024's budget to put the chatbot on in the expenses. If we've now furthered our case study that it absolutely takes away a front desk person, we're not going to wait to tell an owner that. We're going to go to them in April and be like, hey, we need to put this in May and put it in. So I think we build our budgets as real as possible without a lot of that, knowing that we have the relationships to call on to put something in an emergency or in an opportunity to grow revenue. So you want it to feel achievable. you also want it to be a little bit of a stretch. So, you don't want to build it heavy one way or the other where, it's, a can of corn, or the other way that, a team sees it in December when it's signed off on, they're like, well, this is unachievable. So,
It's a real
let's just,
balancing act there.
yeah, big time.
Yeah. Also, Johnathan, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your, the tools that you use in budgeting, any software that you find helpful, any data sources that you find helpful in forecasting, any suggestions like that might be helpful to those in a similar role.
Yeah, absolutely. For me on the revenue side, it's easy to say, we seek out market data in any form we can. I think the funny thing about the last year and the approaching years is that, I think historically a lot of people could just kind of look at the RevPAR prediction for the US and kind of base their growth on that a little bit. But we've realized, and for us, it's always been our case because we're in secondary and tertiary markets. We're not heavily founded based on what the national markets do. So even like now, and as I've mentioned in COVID, some of our properties came out of it really quickly, good for them. And, you're seeing markets like, Chicago and others rebound now, and they're getting to that. So I think the realization that, there's sub-level data there that you can call on via STAR, CBRE, some localized reports through, your DMOs and other things where you can kind of see some sub-level performance. Maybe it's based on scale. Maybe it's a specific comp set. And for us, we've kind of always called on that because, even to use an example like Chicago, the neighborhoods in Chicago just act so differently. That in Atlanta was kind of the same way. We've been in the Atlanta market before, and to see the way a Super Bowl impacted, the subsets of that city, you couldn't just grab that city data and be like, well, I have a hotel in Atlanta. It's going to do what all the other Atlanta hotels do. So, for us, it's really, it's a dual-legged top-line forecast to where we're kind of forecasting the market as well as ourselves at the same time to support where we're either call it growing an index or we're shrinking or the market's coming back and we came back faster. So I think we look at both factors that way. And then on the total expense side, we use a budgeting and forecasting system that I think for us is advantageous because we have so many crossing properties in so many different markets. Let's just take our collegiate stuff, right? We can say, all right, well, let's look at collegiate properties between 50 and 80 keys. And let's look at their guest supply line, or let's look at their, FTEs in this department, or let's look at their digital marketing spend, and let's compare that across 8 properties. And that, as anyone would do with a host report or some of the reports, these bigger foundations put out, we have that accessible, and we can kind of, what I like about it is the flexibility to run that, right? Like we can look at the running 6, we can look at the running 12, we could look at July, and we could say, kind of here's the driver, here's the basis. We're seeing everyone at 20% cost on this line, but this one hotel is at 35. Why is that? Why is that off? Right. And it gives us, a big leg up in the sense that, there's 100 scenarios where we could run that, right? We could.
So you're speaking of the tool that you're using allows you to do these comparisons across properties of the same type in various ways, it sounds like.
Yeah, right? Almost a drill down to a GL level or a top level segmentation. And we use it for that, right? It's great as a standalone forecasting tool because drivers can be dynamic or so, like there's individual features where you're like, this is good UI, UX, but on the actual portfolio side, it's also good that, there's the ability to compare against live data or, one of the values, it's funny to think that someone might be hitting up against that. But in the last 2 years, we wanted to do comparisons or call it, I think the hotel industry nationally has been comparing to multiple years, right? Yeah. You're going back to your benchmark year, albeit 18 or 19. And now people are working off the most current year. So like this year for us, it's, some hotels are going to be looking at 22's performance and 2019's performance. Well, to have a system at hand that can do that very easily
Sure.
changes the world versus like someone having to go run those individually or handing an
Oh, yeah.
owner two budget roll-ups and be like, here's the comparison to 19 and here's the comparison to 22. It just,
Right.
it
Right.
makes life easy. I think it takes the stress out of some levels that could actually be very
Yeah.
stressful.
Streamlines things a lot more. Right. Yeah, you mentioned being aware of these developments in specific cities. Like I think you mentioned the impact of the Super Bowl in Atlanta or things like that. Right. Do you use CVBs, Convention Visitor Bureaus, at all as a resource?
Yeah.
Some data on things like that? Just
Yeah. I
wondering.
mean, as major independent hoteliers, absolutely. They're strong in their sense of event knowledge and marketing. I can give the other example of like, in university markets, we're all over the university, whether we have a direct relationship or not, because, in West Virginia, where we have a property, the parents weekend and the games matter and the incoming teams matter. And when they're holding a conference matter. So,
Mhm.
those relationships, especially in the revenue world, will give you that leg up. It gives you an understanding of either something that happened in your past year or something that's coming up that you need to be on top of. So it's probably on our takeover checklist. It's on our every year checklist, like being connected to any local entity. I think we have a little bit of an old school approach that, sometimes you hope you have relationships with your competitors, right? Like your general manager knows the general manager at another hotel, and
Ideally, that would be pretty helpful, it sounds like.
absolutely,
Yeah.
like when they're under renovation or like something's happening over there, you want the relationship from a, call it a backup standpoint or, good neighbor standpoint, but it's advantageous in many ways, as is CVBs and any, market
Sure.
related. That's what I was saying with the universities or, any big driver as it relates to the markets that we're in.
Jonathan, so just to wrap up, I was wondering if you could kind of overall describe what you think are the top best practices in the area of budgeting and forecasting today. It could be approaches you take now that you didn't take in the past because it being post-pandemic, right? Any new approaches, I guess, or things that you can recommend that you do in your processes now?
Yeah, I mean, not to say that it's changed so drastically post COVID, but
Right.
I think one, just to reiterate it, what we just touched on, right? It's like do a true assessment of your property in the market and the comp set, right? I think that
Mhm.
helps all levels. It helps all levels to for my team in the top line to understand the market and where we're positioned. And for us, a good COVID example of that is we, as independent and smaller properties, we're in markets or in comp sets with 200 key properties and we're 40. Well, some of our bounce back was a lot quicker. Now in 2023, when those 200 key properties start bouncing back, how are
Mhm.
we explaining that? So I think
Yeah.
a simple reassessment, if you're not doing it every year, for us, it's a part of every budget year where we're redoing a
Right.
SWOT analysis, we're redoing a comp set analysis, and supplies coming on everywhere. So just make sure you know that, right?
Yeah.
You know, I,
A
the
little
other,
more, a little more reevaluation of budgets going on more consistently now than before, would you say?
um,
During the year, maybe, or
yeah, I don't think a real scrutiny of the budget itself. I think forecasting is being looked at, but again, for us, forecast accuracy is something I look at with my team all the time.
yeah.
It's the knowledge and ability to know, where is that expanded now, or how tight am I being to that to pre-COVID environments, and what is my expectation going at now
Mhm.
that we've kind of restabilize an environment. I think one thing for us too, knowing all the thought process that has to go into what is a new operating environment, right? We're kind of operating under a little bit of different rules. Expectations of hotels are coming back.
Yep.
You know, you have your general managers and your teams assessing so much. Excuse me, we put so much into the past 3 years of like making our budget process non-stressful. And what I mean by that is like we work off a pretty, call it strict schedule, but it's known what our budget expectations are via meetings, via presentations, via
Mhm.
schedules, everything. So like our team is not stressed every week from July to October knowing what's next. It's clearly defined what's next. Our templates are there, like knowing what they're presenting, what the requirements are, what dates they're going to. I talked about 2019 and 22 before. So, we're trying to take a lot of the simple stress work out of it and make the job of like actually being a strategist and being, a market assessor and being a labor assessor, the true work that goes into budgets, because that's where we want to like, find the wins and, be able to put some of the dream stuff in where it's like, man, we have a general manager here who can change the level of service and elevate this hotel to be the best hotel in the market. Right. How do we give them the tools to that? Well, one, a little bit, it starts in this. They need the money and the resources to do it, but also they don't need to be burdened with the other things that kind of come with that, where we can make their life easier.
Sure. Stress can definitely work against performance, right?
Absolutely.
I'm trying to minimize that. Yeah. Johnathan, look, thanks so much for your insights on this topic. I think that our readers will find it very helpful, right?
No. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Great. We'll touch base then again.
Thank you for listening to Lodging on Demand. If you want more content like this, subscribe to Lodging Magazine on YouTube. You can also subscribe to Lodging on Demand wherever you get your podcasts. For news and updates, follow @Lodging Magazine on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn, or visit us at lodgingmagazine.com.